What's up? This is your creature, Alma, and today what I want to talk about is kind of my perspective that I had on people who were trans, like over time, from like when I was a little kid to middle school to high school to college up to this point. I think I brought it up in my last video a little bit, but I want to bring it up here. I still want to try to make it as summarized as possible, but I want to go into more detail about it. So to begin with, as a kid, I didn't really think much of people who were trans because, again, my family was like pretty religious, and something like that was just never brought up. In fact, what I had actually learned was two aunts that I had who would visit were actually a lesbian couple, and as a kid I never thought much of like, oh, why are my two aunts always together? Are they just really close friends or something like that? And then it was like later on I'd find out, oh wait, turns out they were actually lesbian, and they always try to like deny it and stuff like that with the family because it was like a taboo. Anyways, so that never got brought up, like people who are trans. I'd only see blurbs of stuff like that, reading about like people who were prominent in the stuff that I liked. Again, I love like electronic music, just like soundtracks and like movies in general. Big like cinephile as a kid, and I was super obsessed with Tron. And would you believe it? I learned that Wendy Carlos, the lady who did the soundtrack for the original Tron, was also a transgender woman, and I was just like, huh, okay, that's interesting. I also watched other movies, and one movie I specifically remember something like that being brought up in was With Nell and I. And I remember Paul McGann's God damn it. Paul McGann's character was like reading a magazine, and one blurb of it brought up someone getting gender reassignment surgery. I was like, okay, that's a thing. Okay, cool. Now, of course, that wasn't the only perspective or exposure I got to like the concept of someone being trans. I had like the big negative perspective on that, where, you know, being trans is treated as like a joke. It was usually melted in with the idea of like cross-dressing. The other thing was a comic relief type guy would fall in love with like a woman or something like that, but they wouldn't learn until later that, oh, it turns out they got boy parts in something, say, like Ace Ventura. But again, you kind of get the idea of like that kind of picture like a lot of like media would paint in a very like subtle way that normally you don't think about, but it's not until later that you realize, oh, huh, this might have played a part into how I thought about things at this point. By that point, I mean like middle school. I wanted to start developing like ideas on how I wanted to see the world, or like how I did see the world and such. And I got really into like dude bro stuff and such, like trying to be like stoic and, you know, really being into like guns and such. So I aligned myself with like those really, really heavy perspectives usually some people would like have, and that fuel was built up even more because of like the amount of like cringe compilations that were on YouTube. A lot of like rage compilations of people who were transgender getting mad about someone like misgendering them. So then that just built like a negative perspective on something I literally did not think about like otherwise. And even further with, again, like stuff I mentioned like misgendering and such, that really confused me. Like then at that point where I was like, okay, so you're telling me that someone can think that their biological makeup means nothing and such, and will declare that as truth and want other people to also abide by that truth. And again, that was also built on just like the perspective I had on like LGBTQ social media, where people would bring up like different genders and such like that, or like the whole Bill Nye thing, where I was just like, okay, to me this stuff is like crazy ridiculous. What the fuck do you mean gender is a spectrum? What do you mean it's like there are like 50 million of them? What are these Zan Krieger pronouns or something like that? Like I don't know, I just thought that was like crazy to me and like ridiculous. I saw the perspective I had was the same perspective I had towards people like super hardcore like megachurch religious people who were like really into, I don't know, stuff like, I guess, miracle spring water and stuff like that. Like that's how I saw that for like a while. But once I got into high school, I started making friends. Some of my friends were trans, and it again just kind of put like those negative thoughts to rest, because again, everyone was always like super chill and understanding. If I accidentally misgendered someone, I'd correct myself, and again, I just treated it as like a respect kind of thing. It's like, yeah, maybe at first I don't really understand it, but I'm gonna respect you and such. And again, everything was hunky dory. Now, because of that, I also started to notice that a lot of other people, specifically like the people I had looked up to, had a very different reason for feeling the way they did about people who were trans than I did. That's when I started to learn, oh, a lot of these people are bringing like talking points up based off of like religious texts, or just vaguely talking about like things being like immoral and stuff like that. Like that's how I saw it. I just thought it was just like a bunch of like hoo-ha, like a bunch of ridiculous like getting scared over someone like dressing up, basically. Someone wanting to present how they want to present in like society. And it got worse, as you can imagine, because then I started like looking into like how bad things can like really get, obviously, when it comes to disdain towards people who are trans and such. Like, obviously, no surprise to me then, again, like that, this is like a very cruel world. Again, that's not a surprise to anyone. But then putting a magnifying glass on specifically how that was happening towards people who are trans, that was my wake-up call. Just like, yes, things can get freaking worse. Things are worse. Things will be worse. They'll continue to be worse, because it's not just, someone making fun of someone who's trans because they think what they're doing is ridiculous, or they have this idea of like a moral code. No, and this is worse than someone throwing like water or like a bucket of water on someone. This is worse than someone yelling and getting angry at someone. No, we're talking about people who get fucking murdered. With that idea in mind, I just had like a greater sense of disappointment towards like the people I'd love and such. Specifically when they'd be exposed to like this topic and such. And I was never really much for like having super heated arguments. But say for instance, I brought a friend of mine home and they were like trans masculine. And you know, just hanging out like any other friend, any cis friend would hang out with me at that time. Like my parents were like kind, welcoming and all that until they left the door, where then it would turn into, you know, just kind of that whole belittling perspective of someone doing something like that. To me, it was like, okay, well, it's fine if you like don't understand this thing, but when you feel the need to like jokingly refer to their pronouns in a way that's like, you know, they're like a he, they, whatever, or something like that with that kind of like expression, then it's like, okay, that you can have whatever ideas you want, but why did you need to put on a little show like that? Like, what's the purpose? Maybe to some people such like a subtle thing. And obviously, like, people need to have like tough skin and whatever because, you know, sticks and stones and such, but it's like a signal in a way where it's like, okay, well, you're kind of making a joke about this right now. What's going to happen when this situation comes closer to home? And the idea, the question that I had in my brain a lot of the time, like, okay, well, what would happen if I turned out to be trans? Keep in mind that throughout like this whole period of time, through not thinking much about trans people to having kind of like a disdain for them for a while because of like my perspectives, like through like middle school, high school, to making friends, to eventually realizing that other people didn't see things the same way I did. I had an envy for people who were born female, for the things I wanted, the things I had. Like, hell, I mentioned in my last video, I tried on my mom's clothes sometimes because I wanted to see how I'd look in them. I'd have like dreams about being born as a girl, about being in a sapphic lesbian relationship, or I'd literally draw myself as a girl with like outfits and hairstyles and such. So this question eventually turned into a reality. It turned into like entire sit downs with like my family, stuff like that. Like absolutely serious. Like the way I saw that, it was sort of like, oh yeah, this thing I always hear like my friends talking about with their personal experiences. It's happening right now. Great. And that it went even further sometimes when it turned into like an emotional fit then at that point. And again, that made me realize, oh wait, like, oh wait, Like, so you do feel like I just died, basically, and that I replaced myself. That's how you're feeling right now about me. But, yeah. I will say though, I'm very happy that things have improved for the better. Um, but yeah, hopefully this video was interesting. Hopefully hopefully it wasn't too hard to understand. Hopefully my wording choice was okay, because I know I'm not like the most verbose or intelligent person to talk about subjects like this. Yeah. Till next time, I guess.